Hello and welcome to Road Trip Criminals, Episode 2, the show where we go through every state in the United States and talk about one crime from each of them. And today, we're talking about Alaska, largest state in the Union. And before we get into the scary stuff, Jessica?
Yes.
You've got some facts for us?
I do. So, as Matthew stated, today we're talking about the largest state in the Union, being Alaska, which, interestingly enough, also does not have an official nickname, like Alabama.
2 in a row.
So, yeah. The one that most people would recognize is the Last Frontier, right?
Right.
Because they're...
I thought that was space.
Well, that's the final frontier. This is the last frontier. Right. Because, they're big on the wilderness and survival and stuff there. Like, I have mad respect for anyone who manages to survive in Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
Although I would assume city life is a bit easier because you have a little bit more convenience there. Although everything is much more expensive.
Oh, yeah.
They also, Alaska's also known as the land of the midnight sun because they have those times a year where the sun is just there all the time.
Yeah.
There are some parts of Alaska that the sun doesn't set for like 84 days straight. So that's exciting. It was also at one point made fun of and called Steward's Folly because William Stewart was the one who proposed the idea of buying Alaska, and at the time it wasn't believed to have been a good idea. I don't know, maybe some people still think it wasn't a good idea, but people made fun of Alaska and Stewart by calling Alaska Steward's Folly. But and for the same reason they also called it Stewart's Icebox. So yep. But on a happier note or more funny note, it's also called Up Over to be the opposite of Australia's Down Under.
Oh.
So, well, there's that. There's a little bit of fun there at the end.
Yeah.
Alaska's motto is North to the Future, which, I don't know, maybe they also think that their nickname that everyone knows sounds a lot like Star Trek.
Yeah,
So-
that's very to boldly go,
Yes. Oh, goodness. So, as you can probably guess, their state mammal is the moose.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. But they also have a state marine mammal, which is the bowhead whale.
Huh.
So, right. Their state sport is dog mushing, obviously.
Also makes sense, yeah.
Right. And their state dog breed is the Alaskan Malamute.
Right. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
for their dog
Big boys.
mushing, there's the Malamute, which I love Malamutes. They're very cute.
They're
I
very
love dogs
big.
in general.
Very big.
Well, that's about all my fun facts. So now we should get into the not as fun facts
Yeah, tell me about crime.
that we're covering today. Yes. So this one takes place in Craig, Alaska,
Okay.
which is down on the southern part in a little island. It's kind of like halfway down. I can't remember now. Oh shoot, I should have definitely written this down. One of the provinces in Canada. Hold on, I think I did write it
Okay.
down. Yeah.
Is it like the little part edging on Canada? Is it like the islands?
Yes, it's one of those little islands that's like right on the edge of Canada.
Gotcha.
It's about halfway down the British Columbia province in Canada. I did write it down.
It's pretty far down.
It's pretty far down there. It's not mainland Alaska.
Right.
And Craig's known for their fishing,
Makes sense.
like the commercial fishing, and the fish processing, obviously, for all the commercial fishing.
Right.
And at some point, they realized, oh, fishing has a season, and we can't maintain a town on a season.
Right.
And so they officially also started getting into the timber industry. So
okay.
that's their three big things that they do. There is, well, I guess two things is fish and timber.
Mm-hmm.
So
sounds like most of Alaska that
right,
names in
yeah,
that.
yeah. But the crime today is, I guess, officially known as the investor murders, which has a surprising lack of deaths of investors. So,
Good old name.
the investor was the name of a fishing boat.
Oh,
So, yeah,
okay.
there will be no investors actually dying here.
Man, I thought we were going to be talking about like a white-collar murder case, and Alaska
No.
was the last place I expected for that.
Yeah, right? No, it's actually the largest mass murder in Alaska.
Oh,
So,
fun.
because there were 8 victims.
Yikes.
So, yep. So, when I was looking, I was trying to figure out about how many people were in Craig at this time. And it's hard to tell because a lot of people only come in for the fishing season. So it's much
Right.
busier during the fishing season where people come in out of town
Yeah, yeah.
for that sort of thing. So looking at census data is a little useless, I guess you could say, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, there was, the official people there year round is like 1,000 people, but there's a ton of people there for fishing season, which when this happened, it was about around the end of fishing season. There was like only a couple days left.
Gotcha.
So you'd have a lot of people coming inland as well during that time because they were bringing in their hauls as well.
Yeah, right.
Yep. So I figure since there's so many victims, we should probably kind of go over them first.
Okay.
To get everyone in their heads before we get into the actual crime.
Sounds good.
So, I guess you could say the big one up front, right? Like, the one that this wouldn't have gone down like this had if it wasn't for him, I guess you could say.
Okay.
Is Mark Colthurst.
Mm-hmm.
He was 28 when he died. It was actually his birthday.
Oh, no.
So, right.
That's rough.
But he was the owner of the investor.
Okay.
And it was a 58-foot purse signer, which a purse sign is it's a certain kind of net that they use to catch fish.
Oh, okay.
Because like it goes down and then when you pull it, it pulls closed like a drawstring bag.
Gotcha.
So it helps prevent fish from escaping by swimming down.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the preferred way to catch schools of fish that are closer to the surface, like salmon, like Alaska's known for.
Right.
At the time, which this was in 82. I don't know if I mentioned that before. This was in 82.
I was just about to ask that.
Right, yes. So this happened in 82.
In 82, how did a 28-year-old become the captain of a ship?
Well, he was very good at fishing, actually. He had been fishing for a while, and he actually was apparently well known for being really good at fishing. He also kind of had a temper, but
That's
like you don't really realize. I'll mention it here in a second. Oh, here I have it right here. So he had been fishing since his early 20s. So he'd been doing it for several years at this point.
Okay.
But apparently, in 1 week in 1979, Mark had caught $105,000 worth of fish.
Jeez.
So
yeah, that'll do it. That'll buy
yeah,
you a boat.
fishing. Yeah, fishing is more expensive, I guess, than we realize. Although we should probably realize that with how expensive fish costs to buy at the store.
It's true. Yeah.
But the investor boat itself cost $850,000 at that time, which
Okay.
currently is around $2,300,000.
Jesus.
And he had purchased it in 1981, so the year before the murders happened.
So didn't really get much of a return on investment with that guy, huh?
Unfortunately, no. But he was very proud of it, and he apparently gave tours to people if they were interested, because he apparently he loved his boat so much.
Right.
I don't know why he named it the Investor, though. I did not find that anywhere.
It was an investment.
I guess so. But apparently Mark, along with being a very good fisherman, he was also known for being rather cocky and hot-headed. So,
Okay.
so his wife was Irene.
Okay.
She was also 28. So I guess she was older than him by a little bit. I don't know how much. I don't know when her birthday was.
Yeah.
But she was possibly pregnant. I saw some sources say that she was, and others not mention it, which, if you're not pregnant, you tend not to mention that they're not
Right,
pregnant. That's like the default. So she was maybe pregnant at the time, and she was maybe not.
And she was on board whenever whatever happened.
Yes, she is one of the victims.
Dang.
So, depending on if she was pregnant or not, you could potentially count 9 victims
Right.
if she was.
Yeah.
But actually, the day of the incident or whatever, it occurred overnight. But I believe it was the next day. She was intending to fly back home because they lived in Washington, in Blaine, Washington.
Okay.
So she was intending to fly home with her 2 kids the next day after the murders, unfortunately, stopped that from happening.
Right. Were the kids there too?
Yes, unfortunately, her 2 kids, Kimberly and John, Kimberly 5 and John 4, were 2 of the victims
Jesus.
of this. And I don't understand how anyone can kill kids or harm kids. It's
Yeah, no.
absolutely tragic, especially such small children.
Yeah, it's not good. Not a
because-
good look.
Yeah, because Kimberly was about to start kindergarten when she flew back to Washington. So, hadn't even started school yet, really.
Well, that's half the victims. What about the others?
Yep. The other 4 were crewmen, deckhands, so not a whole lot about them. Mike Stewart was 19. He was also Mark's cousin.
Okay.
So that's probably how he got the job.
Right.
There was also Dean Moon, 19, Jerome Keown, 19, and Chris Heyman, which was 18.
Wow, that's
Yes, they were all
that's a
really
young group of
Yes.
sailors. Like the oldest person there's 28.
Yeah. I read somewhere, and I don't know how true it is because I only saw it in one place, but that all the deckhands, Mike, Dean, Jerome, and Chris, all knew each other from high school, and that's how they ended up working together.
Oh, very possible.
It would make sense since they're all about the same age.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I
don't know.
mean, go on a fishing trip for the summer, get some extra money before college starts with the boys, just go for
Yeah.
however, I don't know how long fishing season is.
it's usually around the summer, I believe.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm not sure when it opens officially, but
Yeah, make some money after
but
high school,
this- yeah, especially if
with the
because Mike, who's the cousin of Mark, right, and he probably saw how much money that Mark had made to be able to buy this
Right.
huge boat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's
and was
probably just like, hey, call up some buddies like, hey, you want to make some money over the summer?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
And then they didn't.
really unfortunate. Yes, really unfortunate. But now let's get into what happened that night where they all unfortunately died.
Yeah.
So
tell me.
it starts on September 5th of 1982, which was a Sunday. That Monday is when Irene and the 2 kids were supposed to fly out back to Washington.
Right.
So the investor docks in Craig, Alaska, and unloads its haul of 77,000 pounds of pink salmon. A lot of
Jeez.
fish.
Okay.
So the haul was estimated to be worth around $33,000, which is
Okay.
currently about $90,000. So,
Jeez.
right? But the cannery that he gave his shipment to didn't pay per haul, but at the end of the season, so he didn't get
Okay.
paid at that point.
Right. Yeah, I guess
And
that makes sense.
Right. Apparently, he also didn't keep much money on the ship either, or like cash on him, apparently, and we'll talk about that a little bit more
Okay.
later.
All right.
But the Alaska Department of Fish and Game had temporarily closed the salmon season, but it was planning to be reopened the next day for the final salmon opening of the year. So
Okay.
I'm not sure. I couldn't find why they had temporarily closed it, but for some reason they had. So a lot of people were coming in that day since it was closed to give in their hauls.
Right. Right.
So after unloading their haul, the investor went to the North Cove dock.
Okay.
And the way they docked, because there were a ton of people there, right? Not everyone's going to get
Yeah.
a spot on the dock.
Right.
They were actually tied to another signer called the Decade,
Yeah.
and that signer was tied to another signer called the Defiant.
Okay.
So they are 3 ships out.
Yeah, that happens.
Yep, the Defiant was the one that was actually tied to the dock.
Gotcha.
So it's a bunch of ships tied together. So to get to the dock, the people on the Investor had to go across the Decade and then the Defiant, and then could get onto the dock.
Gotcha.
Yep. So after they docked, I referred to everyone by their last names here.
Okay.
So this is Dean Moon and Jeremy Keown.
Okay.
So Dean Moon and Jeremy Keown left and allegedly bought drugs from
Okay.
a former crewmate of Mark's named John Peel.
Okay.
I don't know how true that is. Apparently, there was a lot of drugs going around at that time, especially in the fishing
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, from what I've
So-
heard, I mean, I've heard of stories from people in big like fishing towns and other like trade towns like that, and I've heard that like during big seasons they have a lot of people who come in looking for work and they bring
Yep.
the drugs with them. You know.
Yeah. So yeah, it's something like that. Apparently, there was a big drug issue there. I'm not sure how prevalent it still is.
Right.
I haven't looked into it. But allegedly, those two went and bought some drugs off of, and I'm not sure what kind of drugs either, off of John Peel.
Okay.
So Mike Stewart and Chris Heyman left the boat together, but no one remembers seeing them out that night. None of the locals do. So not sure what they did after they got off the boat.
And were they these 4 guys? Were they locals to Craig?
No, the 4 deckhands were all from Washington.
Okay.
Yes.
So they were also from. Okay.
Yes. They do know that Keown and Stewart made phone calls to their families at a payphone by a laundromat. Keown called his brother, and Stewart just called his home. They don't know exactly who he talked to. He just called home.
Okay.
But at that time, neither had indicated that anything could be wrong. So after they, died, they talked to their families, and they said they didn't indicate that they were suspicious of anything. So
Okay.
all 4 of the Colthers went to a restaurant, a waterfront restaurant, called Ruth Ann's Restaurant,
Okay.
as a celebration for Mark's birthday. So
Right.
family get together. Yep. But like I said earlier, Mark didn't have any cash. So apparently he wrote a $100 check to a friend and his friend gave him $100 in cash so that they could go out and eat.
Okay,
So he
sure.
had no cash on him. So that's unlikely to be a motive, right?
Right.
The restaurant reported that there weren't any issues there either. Apparently they just, ate and had a good time. But the Coulthers left the restaurant around 9:30 p.m.
Okay.
Not a.m., p.m.
Right.
And remember how they have to go over 2 other boats to get back to the investor?
Yep.
Someone from the Decade, which is the one that the investor was actually tied to, remembers John, their little 4-year-old, waving and saying hi to him, and they said hi back on their way back to the investor.
That's sweet.
Yes.
So they
So-
did make it back to the ship.
They did make it back to the ship.
Okay.
And the murders were believed to have taken place overnight. However, they were, tied to the other ships, so you're thinking, why didn't anyone on the other ships hear anything?
Right.
Because they were shot. And so you'd think, oh, they heard gunshots or something. However, there was a huge storm going on that night. And the crew of the Decade were throwing a gigantic party to celebrate the ending of the season.
Right. Yeah.
So, a lot of noise that night and especially if, the boat next to you is partying, they're drinking, they're probably not paying attention.
Yeah.
And if you're drunk, you might not realize, oh, that was a gunshot and not thunder
yeah,
or something like that, right?
right.
Yeah. So, plus the party would also block some of the noise for the Defiant, which was at the other end.
Yeah.
Because the one partying was that boat in the middle, which is very unfortunate
Yeah.
that all that happened to occur
Yeah,
and no
that
one.
is, no pun intended.
Just a big old coincidence.
A perfect storm of just.
Right. Yes. So September 6th, which is the Monday, at 6 a.m., several fishermen see the investor drifting away from the dock. But not actively moving, just drifting away, right?
Okay.
One of the crew members from the Decade, which is the boat that they were tied to, noticed that the investor had left their tie-down lines on the Decade's deck, which apparently those can be pretty expensive.
Yeah,
So, good guy on the Decade was trying to flag down the investor and let him know, hey, you left your ties.
What a guy.
Yeah, waving at the person in the wheelhouse, because he did see a man in the wheelhouse.
Okay.
So he was trying to wave him down, and the man in the wheelhouse simply just waved back at him. Didn't try to stop or anything. So I don't know if he just thought that he was waving or what, but
yeah, right.
So the skipper for the Decade also came out a little bit later, came on deck, and also says that they saw a man in the wheelhouse. So
How far away were they? Does it say?
I'm not sure. It just said that they were drifting away from where they were docked. So
Okay.
they couldn't have been too far if the people on the Decade were still trying to wave them down and give them their ties back and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
Right.
Right. At 7:30 a.m., a crew member of another Signer boat, I don't have the name for this one, unfortunately, but they spot the investor anchored near Fish Egg Island, which is across the harbor from Craig.
Okay.
And it apparently has some fairly deep water in that area.
All right.
And around that same time, someone else reports seeing the investor's skiff, which is just that little boat,
Yeah, right.
but it's tied to cold storage in Craig. So
Okay.
on one end you have the investor anchored over near Fish Egg Island. However, the skiff is back in town in Craig near the cold storage. So,
Okay.
yep. At about 10:30 a.m., a heavy fog comes in, and it obscures the vision of everyone in Craig.
Right.
And since the fish season had reopened that day, then everyone was using radar to navigate, basically.
Yeah.
So no one could see the investor at that point, what it was doing, what was going on around it, that sort of thing.
Okay.
However, the captain of the Decade, which was the boat that they were tied to, thought that the investor had left because of their party, and he thought they were being rude, and so he wanted to apologize. So he tried to radio the investor, but never
Good guy.
received a response.
Yeah. Good guy. It's nice of him.
It was nice of him. A little unfortunate that it happened so late.
Yeah, well, yeah, being neighborly. Yeah.
Yes. On September 7th, which is the Tuesday, the fog finally cleared out. It was foggy all day the day before, so no one could see anything.
Right.
And everyone in Craig was still surprised to see the investor anchored near Fish Egg Island. Because, like I said, Irene and the two kids were supposed to fly out like the day before, and
Right.
obviously Mark would take his boat down to Washington.
Right. Yeah.
So it just sitting out near Fish Egg Island, not doing anything, was suspicious, right?
A bit, yeah.
So sometime during that day, a man is seen buying 2.5 gallons of gas before getting into the investor's skiff and heading back towards the investor.
Okay.
Yep. At 4 p.m., the casino, which is another signer, saw smoke coming from the investor. So they alert the authorities while they're on their way over to see if they can help put it out or rescue anyone from the ship in case there's anyone stuck on there, right?
Right. Yeah.
And on their way to the investor, they come across the investor's skiff and flag him down, or hail him, however you want to say it, and have a chat with him, ask him if anyone is still on the investor, if anyone's harmed, stuff like that. And the guy on the skiff says, yep, there's still people on there, and he leaves. He's just gone. And so,
Okay.
so he heads back to Craig and apparently talks to at least 3 people there before he just wanders off. We don't know what happened to him after that.
You'd
He's
think
gone.
someone would stop him.
Nope.
Jeez.
Well, you'd think that someone on the casino would be like, why did you leave the people on there if you're on
Right.
the skiff, right?
Yeah, just
but they're
ask.
probably like, oh, we need to hurry and get
Yeah,
to the investor to
I
get to
mean,
people.
Yeah, like the guys on the casino, like I give them a pass,
Mm-hmm.
but like the other people, maybe just like, hey, what happened?
Right, you would think, but don't know. People are people. They don't
That's true.
think about these things until after the case, right?
Right.
So when the casino reached the investor, the flames were just so hot and it was just so bad that they couldn't get close to it to offer any sort of assistance. The Alaska State Trooper, Bob Anderson, was the next to arrive because they did, like I said before, they did call the authorities on their way over. So fortunately, authorities got there quickly-ish, I suppose.
Well, not quick enough to talk to Skiff Man.
Yeah, right. Because, well, unfortunately, Craig didn't have a way to fight a fire on the water, so
Yeah.
they were sort of like over there, hold their hands out like being, oh goodness, what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
So they had to call for more assistance from somewhere else, and 2 hours later, a tugboat showed up carrying some water.
Right.
So they started trying to deal with the flames then. The Coast Guard was also called for additional assistance because the tugboat
Smart. Yeah.
didn't have enough power to put out the flames as they were at that point. So Anderson, which was the police officer, went back to Craig while they were trying to deal with the flames and the fire and everything because he wasn't much use there at that point, right? He's a police officer, not a firefighter. But he returned to Craig and let his supervisor know that he thought that the fire spread too quickly for it to be natural, and he thought it was arson.
Mm-hmm.
So his supervisor said that he would send an arson investigator to look. So we have a little bit of competency here.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
At 7:30 p.m., the captain of the tugboat let the Coast Guard know that the fire was under control.
Mm-hmm.
So Anderson returned to the investor from Craig again. I would assume he's probably tired of going back and forth at this point, but you know.
Yeah. How far is it?
It just said across the harbor. So,
Right. So.
and it was visible from Craig, so it
Okay.
couldn't have been
Not too far.
way out there. Yeah,
Right.
not way out there.
Within like 10 miles.
Right. So, let's see. Yes, Anderson returned to the investor, and it was burned to the gunnels and listing 20 degrees. So, the gunnel is the upper edge of the ship on the boat side.
Right.
So,
That's not good.
but, so then Anderson and some volunteers boarded the investor and found the charred remains of 4 people in what had been the galley.
Okay.
So the remains required dental records to identify, and it took a few days for that to go through, because again, this is 82.
Right.
But they were identified as Mark, Irene, and Kimberly Colhurst and Mike Stewart.
Okay.
So 3 of the Colhurst family, and then Mike, the cousin of Mark.
Okay.
All 4 of them had gunshot wounds that came from a .22 caliber weapon.
Okay.
They had been shot multiple times, but it never stated exactly how many. It might have been different for each person. So,
Right.
the coroner stated that the victims had died before the fire had started because there was no carbon dioxide in their lungs. However,
Yeah.
blood alcohol tests suggested that the adults had been drunk. So,
Right. Yeah. Makes
there had been
sense.
some drinking going on.
Yeah. Yeah. They could have had a party of their own.
Right, they could have been partying
some-
on their own because it
for
was
some
Mark's
given crash.
birthday, right?
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the 4 bodies that they found were removed, and then unfortunately the fire flared up again. It started up again.
Oh.
So everyone had to get back off the ship.
And the 4 bodies they got off was the cousin, the wife, and the kids?
And Mark. It was Mark, Irene, the daughter, and the cousin.
Okay. And the cousin. Okay.
Yes. Very unfortunately, the little boy's body was never found or recovered. We will get to that later, but it is really sad.
Yeah.
So while this all is going on the investor, in Craig, the police there had interviewed some of the witnesses that saw the man in the skiff, right?
Right.
So the description that they had gotten from everyone was that the guy was in his early 20s, probably around 20 to 21 years old. He had light brown or blonde hair. He was about 150 to 160 pounds. He was wearing glasses and a baseball cap with a logo on it. He was about 5'10", and he had a pockmarked complexion.
Okay.
So he had, like probably acne scars or something, or real
Right.
deep pores.
Yeah.
So they were at least doing something, right? They were getting the
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty good
description of the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause even though no one had really stopped him, but
Right.
they had something to go off of.
Mm-hmm.
So on September 8th, which was the Wednesday, 2 more officers arrive. And since the investor is at this point still on fire,
Jeez.
they called in a helicopter that had been used for fighting forest fires. So it went and dumped water on the boat, and that put it out. So
Yeah.
the fire is
Well,
finally dealt with.
One of those big, like, napalm dropper helicopters.
Yeah. the boat was towed back to Craig, and had to be towed back because it was in such bad shape.
Right. I don't think they're driving that.
No. It was listing pretty badly. Like, it was just nearly sideways.
Right.
And this is when you start going, police, what were you thinking?
Uh-oh.
So while they were waiting for the arson investigator to show up, they left the investor unguarded. So people just wandered in and out of the ship, and so they think because of that it was left unguarded and people just came in and out as they pleased. And there was also some rising tide. Any sort of evidence that was left is now gone.
Right.
If there was any, because of the fire to start with.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing frustrates me.
Yeah. It's not good procedure.
No, I don't understand why that would be.
I guess it's because, like, I don't know.
No, right? Because you'd think there was 4 bodies found on there already.
Right.
And you think it's an arson, so you'd put at least 1 guard, I feel like, on it. You wouldn't just let anyone wander in there.
Yeah. Not good.
So the arson investigator finally shows up and starts his investigation, and he's able to find some more bone fragments, because at that point anything left would have been just torched, right?
Yeah, it was burned for 2 straight days.
Yes. And apparently pretty hot as well.
Yeah, of course.
Keown's remains were identified, but they couldn't really determine which of the remaining remains belonged to Moon and Heyman. So
Right, but they did find their bodies. They just couldn't tell which one was which.
They couldn't identify them. So, but it's believed that it was Moon and Heyman.
Okay.
I saw one place. I don't tend to trust just one source, right? It's difficult to do that. But I will mention it. One source mentioned that they were eventually able to identify a tooth and jaw fragment from Moon and some burned remains from Heyman, but I don't know if that's just someone saying something or if they actually managed to do it.
Right.
And as I mentioned earlier, they were never able to find the remains of John, the little 4-year-old boy, the son. They believe that his body was completely consumed by the flames because he was so small.
Right.
And oh.
Yeah, and children bones are more like hollow, so that would stay. Is that right?
I'm not sure. I'm not a.
Yeah, because
I don't look into bones a whole lot.
Less developed, and they got less
Right.
bones. They got more bones.
Yeah, they got more bones.
Right.
But they're smaller bones. They got tiny bones.
Yeah, tiny, more brittle. Yeah.
But it was also believed that John had been sleeping in the area that was hit hardest by the flames, and so that's also why they think that nothing of his was ever recovered.
Right.
And that's why they believe that the other remains that they found that weren't, or that didn't belong to Keown, belonged to the other 2 deckhands. And even though at that time, they hadn't ID'd Moon and Heyman's remains and John's remains were just not there,
Right.
Investigators claimed or decided that all 8 people had been killed, so they were all victims.
Yeah.
I can only hope that John wasn't taken and sent somewhere worse.
I mean, given how many people
or anything like that.
Given how many people saw the skiff guy, who, safe to assume,
Right.
he at least set the fire.
Right.
He was always alone. Like, they even saw him in the skiff, and no one was
Right.
with him.
However, remember that somehow he got on there overnight. He could have left again overnight carrying John to whoever horrible person he could have handed him off to.
Yeah, but
So it
it makes more sense.
I
To
don't
me
think it
that,
happened.
That he just died.
He he likely died. Since they did find the remains of the girl, I believe he did die
Right.
as well.
Yeah,
Yes. However, whenever you can't find a body, there's always that little chance, right?
Sure.
But I do believe he died with his family.
Yeah.
So, since Moon and Heyman's remains hadn't been ID'd, they were kind of on the suspect list for a little bit, but they weren't seen again after the incident, so
Right.
they were presumed dead and part of the 8. For a little bit, there was some supposed sightings of Moon in San Francisco after the fire,
Okay.
but that was never confirmed and not really believed. So,
Right.
yeah. So it was likely a case of mistaken identity there.
Yeah.
So the investigation was kind of incompetent,
Yeah.
as shown by the allowing people to wander in and out of the boat as they pleased for a bit there. And also because it was incredibly difficult to find any evidence of who could have done this as well. They had quite a bit of trouble with the investigation because, I mean, for that first part there, other than the 4 bodies, it was hard for them to tell how many people had been killed after the fire had consumed everyone else. So, there was also one investor, when he had been told that the investor's skiff was at the cold storage, he went and looked at it, had a little glance at it, but decided that the rain had washed away any fingerprints, and didn't impound the skiff for a more thorough search.
Okay.
He later said that he didn't realize the skiff belonged to the investor, but I'm going to say he was potentially covering his own butt for missing out on that.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like an excuse.
Right.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Right, yeah. So at this point, basically all the police had were the eyewitness reports of a man in a skiff and a man buying gasoline
Yeah. Right.
before the
Same
fire.
guy.
That they believe was the same guy, but
Okay.
the descriptions were kind of vague at the time.
Sure.
And, I mean, there was a bunch of men there at that time, right? Because of the fishing season ending and all that. So
Yeah.
seeing a man in there is like finding a needle in a haystack, right?
Yeah, and especially at the end of the season, because there are so many people like coming back into port that
Right.
tracking down every single person who is in town would be almost impossible.
Yes, absolutely. So there were kind of 2 theories that people were thinking at that time, which is that the killer snuck on board before anyone returned and then killed them one by one as they returned to the boat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how likely that is considering where the bodies all were.
Yeah,
Because
and also the fact that the guy on the Decade, right, said he saw the son getting back on the boat.
right, with his family after
Right.
they ate. Yes.
So
So
yeah, I do. The idea of him getting on board while they were on gone and then hiding and waiting makes sense.
yes, you're
But
right.
I don't think it was as they came in he
No.
shot him. Yeah.
He took them out, yeah. Especially because if that were true, then the 4 family members would have all been together. But
Right.
it was 3 of them and the cousin.
the cousin. Yeah.
Right. So at some point, they had to have separated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the other theory is that he got on board and killed them all at one time when everyone was there already.
Yeah.
Although that also causes some trouble too, because there's 8 of them. Well, we won't count the children. There's 6 of
6
them.
adults. 5
Yeah, 6
grown,
adults.
probably very strong men. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So,
Maybe he was waiting on the ship. Maybe he got on board and was waiting for them, and then he heard them get back on and heard them all start drinking. And he's like, oh, cool. And so he kept waiting for them to be significantly inebriated and then popped them.
And I don't remember which two it said at the beginning went for drugs, possibly.
I don't either. It was more.
Let me go back real quick. Hold on.
I don't remember the names fully.
Yeah, give me a second.
There's one that had the last name that started with C. Jerome? Jerome.
Mm-hmm. Keown.
And Keown, yeah. And then
Dean Moon. It was Dean Moon and Jerome Keown went and got...
And those are the two they couldn't identify, right?
No, they identified Keown. They couldn't identify...
No Moon. Okay.
But not Moon or Heyman.
Heyman. Okay.
So if we assume that they did get drugs, maybe they got high that night.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they got high. Maybe they were sharing what they got with Heyman. Mm-hmm. So they were all out of commission. The other three adults were drinking. Mike, Mark, and Irene were drinking. So they're not in their best. And the kids, one of them was apparently probably napping. The other one might have also been napping just with the adults.
Right. But they were all also 4 and 5.
Yes, and they were also 4 and 5. So
right. And also, we don't, because we don't know what drugs they bought. But
correct. Or even if they bought them, but yeah.
They did. Let's assume they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like weed, which is the least offensive drug that you can get, you know?
Right, yeah.
But even that can mess with your cognitive functions and your motor functions and reflexes and everything like that. So maybe, where were Keown and Moon's, where are their bodies found?
They don't say, because all they really found was bone fragments. Right. And so it's kind of hard to tell what got moved while they were moving things as well. So
and maybe they were like on the deck, smoking up, having a good time, and so it comes up, and it's like, oh, it's the guy we bought drugs from. Come on, join us. He's on boat, and then executes all of them. Then goes down to the galley, kills the family, then pulls the crewmen down off the deck so they can't be seen. Right. And then leaves.
I don't think they would have been on the deck because there was that storm going on.
Right. That's true. That is true.
Yeah. Yeah. However, and I'm going to spoil it a little bit here, the guy they end up arresting turns out to be the guy that did sell them the drugs earlier. Or allegedly sold them the drugs earlier.
Yeah. And allegedly killed them.
And allegedly killed them. So
yeah, and you mentioned this, I think before we started recording, but this is technically unsolved, right?
Yes, it is technically unsolved because as I've kind of gone through this, you can see they don't have a whole lot of evidence here. So they did arrest someone, but they didn't have really anything on him. So we'll get into that just a second. Yeah. Yeah. So basically at this point, what we know about what happened is Mark, Irene, and Kimberly and Mike were all found together in the galley with multiple .22 caliber gunshot wounds. Irene, I don't think I mentioned this, but Irene was still wearing the same clothes that she had worn to the restaurant, so she had not changed. Okay. And neither of the other crews noticed anything wrong due to the storm and the party going on.
Right.
It is... I don't know how long that party was going on for. I don't know when it started. Yeah. So... Because, again, you have to cross over 2 boats to get to the investor. So whoever came on would have had to pass over those 2 boats. So it's interesting that no one on either of those ships saw anything. So if they had left their ships to go onto the dock and into town, then maybe he snuck on then. If he had gone through whenever the party was going on, then it'd be much harder to notice him because the people on the Defiant would think that he was going to the party,
Right.
potentially. The people on the Decade are partying,
Right.
so they won't notice anything. And then his goal is the investor, so...
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I had this thought whenever you first mentioned the party, but maybe one of the people partying was the killer.
Right. Yeah.
Because, like, if you're partying and someone in the party leaves for a few minutes, comes back, you're not going to assume, like, oh, they just went next door and
Right.
shot up the place.
Well, the thing is that they do believe that the killer stayed overnight on the investor, and he was the one that was moving it away in the morning.
Right, yeah.
So, and then he stayed on after that, like all that time. It's, I don't like the thought of staying on a boat with 8 corpses, right?
Yeah, it's very Hinterkaifeck.
Yes. Just, pretty gross.
It's gross.
Yeah. But yeah, they think, because, you know, your idea could be true. Like, he was there partying with everyone, and then he went on the ship, killed everyone, went back and partied for a little bit, and then when things were kind of winding down there, he went back to the investor, and that's when he was moving them away towards the Fish Egg Island. But, and you remember how I said that apparently around Fish Egg Island there is some deeper water there?
Yeah.
Well, the murderer had opened the seacocks, which are valves on the hull that allow water in.
Right, right.
It's usually used for things like cooling an engine or getting water into a saltwater sink.
right.
But he was trying to sink the ship.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize this because the fog came in, but it did not sink.
Right.
So, plan B, let's set that baby on fire.
Burn it down. Yep.
Yeah. Because, you know, he had to cover his tracks some way, and plan A failed, so plan B it is. So, the investigators searched for over a year and couldn't find a lead.
Did they ever
And-
search the water with the deep water near the island?
I
The Fish Egg
never
Island?
I never saw anything saying they did. I never saw anything saying they didn't.
Right. Because, I mean,
So,
first of all, just
Yeah.
as you're going, I mean, assuming you know the area well, then going to that island and knowing it's deep water, just toss the bodies in.
right?
Then just tie them to a barrel and chuck them in.
There you go. Yeah.
That seems like so much extra work, and maybe that's what happened to the son.
Right. Yeah, maybe he tried it with one person and it was just like, God, this is such a hassle, and I got 7 more bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, the sun's coming up, and
Right,
I
yeah.
can see the island
Right, yeah. I am visible to everyone in Craig.
completely.
But eventually, I don't know why they didn't do this up front, but a sketch was made depicting the man on the skiff.
A year later,
And yes,
yikes.
right. So it looks like there might be one decently competent police officer being Anderson, who was
Yeah.
like, looked at it and was like, this is arson. And then I don't know what he was doing. He just went off, I guess, after that. Because all the other police officers seem just a little not competent here.
Yeah.
Letting people in, not impounding the skiff, just
Not.
muddling things.
Yeah, just not.
Anyway, so it doesn't surprise me that this happened. But after they released the sketch, a bunch of fishermen came forward and said, this dude is John Peel, who is the guy that sold
Right.
them
He sold the
the
drugs.
drugs.
Right.
Yes. And he used to work on Mark's boat, the one before the investor, called the Kit.
Okay.
And he had also attended the christening of the investor and had dated Mark's sister in the past. So,
so
Peel was-
he's
known to the family.
yeah okay.
Yeah.
Well, that could be how he got on board. you know?
Yes, could be.
Assuming he
like
did
we
it.
said, right? Assuming he did it, it wouldn't be strange for him to be on board, right? Because if it's like, oh, it's Mark's birthday, oh, let me come and celebrate with you. He could have been there drinking with
Yeah.
Mike and Mark and Irene. He could have, since he allegedly sold the drugs, he could have been invited on by the guys and been like, oh, hey, bro, how you been doing?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So there's several ways he could have easily gotten on.
Yeah, and there's
in
also
that regard.
the classic saying of like that like 80% of all homicides or cases is committed by someone the person knows.
Right, yeah.
Or whatever that statistic is.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Same with kidnappings.
Same with kidnappings, yeah.
Yes. Most of the, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah.
Even if that's in your family.
Yeah.
Someone you know.
Well, hey. Audrey.
Yeah, right? Can't trust your family.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
she was a mess.
She was.
Anyway.
Check that out on our first episode. Hey.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes. So police arrested Peel in 1984. At that point, he was working in Fairhaven. And it was, again, 2 years after the murder took place.
right.
So, murder took place in 82. This is now 84.
I mean, to arrest a suspect, that's not too bad. 2 years.
Right, but when you're basing everything off of witnesses, where there might not, things get a little foggy after time.
That's true.
It gets a little bit worse because the trial wasn't until 1986, so 2 years after that. So it's 4 years after
4 years.
everything.
That's, that could be worse.
I guess it
it's
could be
not-
worse, but
It's not Golden State, it's not
that's true.
30 years. Right.
Right, but I think they also had more evidence with Golden State than some witness accounts
That's true.
and dead bodies. That's all they have is witness accounts and dead bodies.
True.
Well, 4 dead bodies and some remains.
In fairness, there are a lot of witness accounts.
Yeah.
But also,
Yeah.
4 years on, like, hey, do you know this guy? That can be, yeah.
Yeah. So, in January 1986, that's when the trial began in Ketchikan, which is where actually Officer Anderson came from, the Ketchikan Police Department.
Okay.
So, yeah, it wasn't Craig, it was Ketchikan, which I am hoping I'm saying that correctly.
I think so.
It
I'm not an expert, but
right.
that sounds right.
So- Right. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. So the jury selection took over a month to complete because the prosecution and defense refused to agree on anything. That continued into the trial. It was so bad that ended up dragging the trial out over 6 months, which made it Alaska's longest running trial. And the judge had to admonish both sides for behaving that way. Like, they were like children.
Yeah,
God.
that's not good. It's not good.
So, again, the prosecution only had circumstantial evidence that mostly consisted of witnesses
right.
saying that the guy in the skiff and the man buying gasoline were one person who happened to be John Peel.
John Peel. Right.
So, not great.
So, Peel wasn't a local either, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
he
he would have
was,
been from
I
Washington.
believe, also
too.
from Washington.
Right, because they knew
Yes,
him.
I believe he was also from Washington.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a rumor that apparently the gas that the man bought wasn't the same type used in the fire. But I haven't been able to confirm that. I only saw it in one place, and it was very much a rumor.
Yeah, it seems hard to
So-
confirm. Like,
Right.
I'm also not an expert on gas chemistry,
Right.
but and I'm sure there are ways to tell, but
Now I would assume it's much easier than it was back in the 80s.
of course, but
Right.
yeah, right, and it could be like chemical makeup or something, but
Right.
that seems like a stretch, especially after it's all burned up, you know?
Right, and-
Especially over 2 days.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how they knew what type of gas he bought. Like,
Right.
I don't know. If I saw someone going up to a gas pump, I'm not looking over their shoulder to be like, oh, he bought, the plus type
got
of
unleaded,
gasoline. Yeah, he got unleaded,
Well,
that sort of thing. So,
maybe, I mean, I wasn't alive in 82, but,
no, me neither.
because they didn't have, like, credit cards and stuff a lot back then. So,
Right.
So he probably had to go in and be like, hey, I want $20 of 100% unleaded. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it might have also... Did they have pumpmen back then still? Like, guys who would pump gas for you?
I'm not sure.
I
I'm not
don't
sure
know
in
when that went out of
Alaska.
style.
I mean, I think it's still around some places, but
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
actually a
it's-
gas station up here near me that still does it,
Oh, really?
apparently. So,
there's yeah. I couldn't tell you. I don't know when
Yeah.
they fell off the wagon.
don't know. So, maybe from that, if there was a pump guy,
Yeah,
maybe
you
from
kinda
that...
Said which one it was. Assuming you remember.
Right. Yes. I'm surprised that they were suspicious of a guy getting gasoline, but
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the suspicious part is when he got back into the investor's skiff.
right, carrying some
Yeah, 'cause
gasoline
it
with
said
him because
they
it was
saw him.
2.5 gallons. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because they said they saw him get back on the skiff. Like, especially
Mm-hmm. Right.
the next day when they're like, oh, hey, this shit's on fire. Like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, at the time they might have been like, oh, he's got some gas for the ship. Maybe
Right.
it's stuck over there and that's why
Yeah.
it's still there or whatever. And now it's on fire and it's like, oh.
Yeah, then you get up the
Yeah.
next morning and see 2 suns in the sky and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So, back to the trial. Again, the prosecution's side was not super strong. However, the motive they went with was Peel's motive was that Mark had fired him.
Okay.
So it was just a revenge from being
Right.
fired. And that led him to kill 8 people,
Including 2 very small children.
including 2 small children, yes.
Oh, yeah. I don't know
so-
about that.
I don't know, yeah. It's hard, but I saw someone commenting saying, your boss that had fired you, that's already kind of annoying, but you see him being so successful, he bought this huge,
Right.
new, nice ship, and it all just adds salt to the wound,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so,
Sure.
It's-
And if it was just Mark that had died, I could see that as a very plausible motive.
Right.
But all
Right.
8 people, that just seems
Yeah.
like overkill, even for someone who could be in a bad mental
Right.
state. And maybe.
no, yeah.
And if he was selling
It's one of those
drugs,
things
then
too-
he was probably doing them too. And the
Right.
fact that we still don't know what kind of drugs he was doing,
Right.
it could have been something harder.
Stronger. Yeah.
It could have been something like heroin, because that can
Meth.
Yeah, or meth, just something really strong, because that can really affect your
Cocaine.
psyche, and make it
Yes.
seem like, oh, this is the only thing I can do. Because boy,
And it's one of those things too where if he was under any sort of influence, then it might have made sense to him that it's like, oh, I killed Mark. I have all these witnesses. I need to get rid of
Right.
all the witnesses.
yeah, yeah, and there's a through line thinking that. So, and if he were on some extremely hard substance, I could see that being the motive. Yeah, but we don't know.
Right. We don't know. So, the prosecution side is little weak on their side.
Right.
The defense was doing a little bit better. They pointed out inconsistencies in the testimony and placed doubt on them because of that 4-year gap.
Right.
So the defense says that the killings were due to a drug deal gone wrong, but they never showed any evidence pointing to drugs.
Right. And also, a drug deal going wrong, for me, seems like a weaker motive, but
Yeah.
it seems like they're grasping at straws.
Right. I mean, it seems like both sides are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The defense also tried to place the suspicion on Moon and Heyman since their remains weren't identified.
Right.
At least at that point, again, I'm not sure if it's true that they were ever identified or not. One source said so. I don't believe one source. So,
Right. And I mean, maybe they were.
and maybe they were.
And maybe it was the three of them. And maybe it was Moon,
Yeah.
Heyman, and Pete. And then Peel was
Right.
like,
This would be,
hey.
yeah. Because this would be very difficult, I feel like, for someone to pull off alone.
Right, yeah.
However, there were several. It's at least the 4 bodies that were found. Those adults were under the influence, and well, the other hard part is it's like the other 2 never went back to their families or whatever. So it's like they had
Right.
to be like, okay, I can't ever return home after this.
And it could have been they see, like, the 3 of them conspire because they just got, what, $30,000 from this fishing trip that they just went on?
Yeah, it was like 33,000. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that was
I mean,
just
hey,
one haul over
mean,
the
that's-
entire season. So
That's $11K each. And I mean, also, these are young guys, you know, like 11K is a lot of money. Like, I'm 22. And
yeah, right.
So maybe the 3 of them conspired to kill them thinking that Mark had gotten the money already. And then when they found out that they didn't, then
Yeah.
then
It became an
maybe they
infight.
turned in each other
Yeah.
and Peel was the one that walked away.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how well known it would have been that he didn't get the money up front or per haul.
Right, yeah. I think
because
that's the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, because he didn't keep any money on the ship or on the boat, so I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how well known all that was
Right, and
at that
that's
time.
a conjecture, but it's
Right,
plausible
yes.
if they didn't know.
It is.
Then maybe they
Yeah.
could catch him before he deposits it or hides it, or because
Right.
he turned it in that day, like a few
Mm-hmm.
hours before
Right.
the murders.
Right, yes.
So it seems like, you know, motive and opportunity are there.
Yeah. And maybe I mean if you follow that line that the other 2 were in on it, maybe he put just a ton of gas on those 2 and that's why their remains could never be identified.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there was just so little of it because he was like, "Oh, really got to cover my tracks here," right?
Right. Yeah. That's. Or he was just pissed at them. Like,
Or yeah, for
you know,
turning on
just-
him.
Yeah, and he was under the influence. He could have just poured some extra on them. Or
Yeah.
he shot them more times or something. you know?
Right. Something to be like, there's probably something more here, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if the 2 guys you're seen with talking to the night of the murder are found with
Mm-hmm.
the most amount of bullet holes in them, that doesn't
Right.
look good.
No, but so it's a thought,
Yeah,
but we can't confirm anything.
right.
So the trials went on for 6 months and 6 days.
Man.
Oh, there was 6 days of deliberation for the jury.
Oh, right.
They ended up being a hung jury. They could not
Mm.
agree.
Right.
Because I don't know if I would be able to come up with a solution here. It doesn't sound like
Yeah,
either side
yeah.
put forward a whole lot of
Yeah,
anything
I
on either
mean,
side.
It's a bad trial with a shaky suspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there was a rumor. This is just a rumor because the jury said that they wouldn't speak to the press or anything. But the press ended up reporting that the jury ended up voting 7 not guilty to 5 guilty So
okay.
it was very split.
Right. Very.
So there was another trial, obviously. That was held in
Makes sense, yeah.
1988. So
6
2 more years after
the
that first
murder.
trial. Yes. And this time it was held in Juneau, which is the capital of Alaska. This time,
Big trial now.
yeah. But this time the trial only lasted for 3 months. And this is because the defense didn't call any of their own witnesses this time. They just let the prosecution do their thing, and then they were
Yeah,
like, all
tried to
right,
debunk it
let's just
from
get this
there.
done with.
Yeah.
Yeah. This time the jury only deliberated for 4 days and ended up handing down a not guilty verdict.
Okay.
So Peel did get to walk free from this. So
That's pretty impressive
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
defense. I mean, not calling any
Yeah.
of your own witnesses and
Right.
still getting a not guilty. That's impressive.
But I mean, if they could put enough doubt in there because again, the prosecution only had eyewitness testimony. At this point,
Right.
it's
6
you
years
know,
later.
6 years later, and if they can put enough doubt on that, then that gives you your reasonable doubt, right? Because
Yeah,
that's how
exactly.
the trial is decided. So I'm not surprised that it was a not guilty, especially because there
no.
was so little evidence on the prosecution side. So in 1990, Peel sued the state of Alaska for $175 million for wrongful prosecution. And he ended up basing this lawsuit on a 1984 memo from one of the lead investigators that said that there was no direct evidence tying Peel to the crime. So, real good job there.
I think that's what they call in the industry a smoking gun.
Yeah. God. No.
That's good.
So in 1997, he sued in 1990, but in 1997 a settlement was reached with a rumored amount. This was not confirmed. It's a rumored
Right.
amount
They
of
typically do.
$900,000. So he sued for $175 million and got $900,000 after 7 years. At that point I'd probably take it too.
Yeah, I mean, shit, 900,000's a stupid amount of money.
Yeah, but I wonder, again, this is just a rumor though, so I don't know if that's what he got like after he had to pay his lawyers and stuff like
Right,
that as
yeah.
well, or if after paying the lawyers, like, oh, you have $2.
Was that gross or net? You know.
Yeah, don't know. So there are a few more rumors here that I'm just going to go through that I found that, again, these are rumors. I
Right.
cannot confirm them. Don't take this as word of God, right?
Yeah, no.
So, when everyone saw that the investor was on fire in Craig and they were watching it, some people claim to have heard Peel say, Mark probably wigged out and shot everybody. So this was before the bodies were found and no one knew that they had been shot. So people were
Okay.
like, that's a little odd.
A little
Again,
weird.
a rumor.
A little weird. Yeah.
So, apparently, again, allegedly, rumor, some people in the Northwest Commercial Fishing Group believed that Mark had it coming, that he had upset a lot of people. He was hot-headed and cocky, so
Right.
he could have upset someone else.
Yeah.
Again, just as likely as Peel, I suppose, in one of those things where they get so upset that they just come in and murder everyone.
Right.
So, don't know how likely that is. Apparently, Peel had failed a polygraph test, but we now know those are super unreliable anyway.
Right, yeah,
so
that doesn't mean a
I don't put a
thing.
whole lot of I don't put a whole lot of faith in here, but I'll throw it out there anyway.
Right.
Doesn't mean anything.
I mean,
so-
how old is Peel?
I don't know. I don't think I ever saw it mentioned anywhere. I might have seen how old he was on the trial, and you could do the math from there.
Sure, yeah.
If you give me just a moment, I can pull that up. Okay. Because it says, Mr. Peel, a 27-year-old boat builder from Bellingham, Washington, was accused of killing the investor's skipper, Mark Colhurst. Da-da-da. So yes, it sounds like this was
He was 27 in the second
He
trial.
was 27 in the second trial.
So he would have been 21 at the time of the murders.
There you go. So he was around the age of
Everyone.
the other deckhands and stuff, yeah.
So you have a 21-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. And we don't know when he was tested, but early 20s.
When the polygraph happened now. Yeah. It would have been probably after they arrested him, which was... Let me find that again real quick. They arrested him in 84, so 2 years after
So
the
23.
killing. Thereabouts.
Yeah, so that's about my age. And if I was
Mm-hmm.
being accused of octuple murder, I'd be pretty shaky
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why nowadays people, well, most people don't believe in polygraphs. Some people swear by them for some reason still, but
Yeah, no,
I know
that's-
I'd set off every polygraph in existence because I have so much anxiety.
Yeah, they're pretty meaningless.
Yeah, because that's the thing too, where it's funny because it's like as soon as I'm aware of something tracking my heartbeat, I had this happen when I had dental surgery.
Right.
Where they hooked me up, they put stickies on my chest to track my heartbeat because they were knocking me out. And so they needed to make sure nothing was happening.
Right.
It's like, as soon as I was aware that it was tracking my heartbeat, because I could hear the beeping, right? I started setting off the alarm because my heartbeat would get so high. So I'm one of those people that it's like, as soon as I realize that something is tracking my heartbeat goes through the roof. So any sort of polygraph that I had would be meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah, so
So
polygraphs are completely useless. So yeah.
useless. Waste of space.
So what are some
I don't know why people do them.
other rumors?
I have one more rumor
Okay.
that two crewmen who worked with Peel the year after the murders claim that Peel admitted to them that he had been the one to murder everyone.
You know,
However,
you hear that a lot.
yeah.
And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No.
Because
no.
imagine you're on a boat with a guy, a few guys, and
Just some bros hanging out.
yeah, you're sitting on the deck sharing stories. Because, like, I mean, you know, fishermen got stories, and then
Of
one
course.
of them drops, "Oh, I killed 8 people on a boat
Yeah, last year.
last year," like record
However-
scratch. Oh,
Yeah.
on a
Well,
boat
if they
with this
if they
guy.
yeah, right. It's like, I think you should leave.
Yeah.
But if they were under any sort of influence of something, get a little chatty.
Sure,
You might
but
say,
I know of a lot of drugs. Like, I know the effects that drugs have on the brain, because I think that stuff's really interesting. Mm-hmm. And typically what drugs will do is... And weed and acid both have this effect, where it will exaggerate... like it'll amplify whatever you're feeling. And so, if you're feeling happy, then you'll feel really happy. But if you're feeling like anxious, then you'll feel really anxious, like panic attack levels of anxious, and that's where like ego death from bad trips come from.
oh God.
And so I can't imagine any substance where he would feel comfortable saying that he killed 8 people.
Right.
Like,
Well, maybe it was just he got real drunk and he blacked out and he doesn't know what he's saying.
sure, but I don't know.
I don't know either.
Like, already, I feel like just casual admissions of guilt are sketchy at best. And
Right.
so having him be under the influence of true, it just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of people that believe that this was a legit thing that happened. But I figured I'd put it out there since I was listing all sorts of silly rumors.
Right.
But I will end this on something that I appreciate. Like is maybe not the right word for this.
Right.
But respect. Respect is probably the best word here. So, every year, in Blaine, Washington, they have Blaine's Blessing of the Fleet ceremony. And so the names of all the investor victims are read aloud with everyone else from Blaine who had been lost at sea since the early 1900s.
Yeah, that's cool.
And as the names are spoken, bells rung, and people step forward to add flowers to a wreath that is cast into the bay at the end.
Yeah.
So for the Colthers, Lori Hart, which is Mark's sister, adds 5 flowers, one for each of the Colthers, and then one for Mike Stewart.
Yeah.
So everyone in the family there. So I think that's very nice.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, a lot of places around like water, big water,
Yes.
like I think Lake Erie. Like I know a lot of towns off
Yeah.
of that have a lot of similar things where they just have a very open respect for the dead and the vanished.
Yeah.
Like with shipwreck diving, there's I think it's like Erie. I could be wrong, but
Okay. There's a lot of lakes up there, so I understand.
right, yeah, it's one of the Great Lakes that's just huge. It's where a lot of shipwrecks happen, and it's where the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk.
Okay.
It's either Lake Erie or Lake Superior. I can't recall. But a lot of people, a lot of residents don't want divers, diving and exploring around near the shipwrecks. Because for
Yeah.
them, it's seen as desecration. Because a lot
Right,
of
yeah.
times, the bodies are still there, where they're never recovered. So,
Right. Yeah, because assuming on where the ships ended up, going down, it might be difficult to get to them.
right, yeah, that's the
even.
thing, is, because the Great Lakes are pretty far north, so that's freezing water, and
Yeah.
those lakes get deep.
Yeah.
Plus, it could just be a thing of respect, where it's
Right. Yes.
oh, leave them there.
Right.
It's what they would have wanted. Burial at sea is very common, so maybe they just see it as pointless to pull them out and then inter them right back in.
Yeah. Or, if you can even get the bodies out. I know
Right.
being in the water for a certain amount of time just it gets you're waterlogged. You're just not in a good shape. So it
Yeah.
might be even impossible to
bloating,
pull them
yeah.
out. Yeah. After a certain point.
Plus, shipwrecks are dangerous.
Right?
Like,
Yes.
really dangerous. And
Yeah.
so, why would you risk someone else's life for someone who
Right.
maybe didn't want to be taken out in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
But,
It's it's one of those things that I could see maybe an argument for it if like the family really wants the body back for some reason.
right, yeah.
But if there is some sort of risk to it, like there's that diver
Yeah.
who went down into
was
that
saying
really
that.
dangerous
Yeah.
cave and ended up dying trying to retrieve a body. So
There are
if
a
it's
few
something
cases
like
that.
that-
Yeah.
yes, something like that, I definitely wouldn't want to someone else to risk their life for the life,
Right, yeah,
or for the body
exactly.
of my deceased person. So,
Yeah, and also
yeah.
the Edmund Fitzgerald, at the very least, is a legend. And so most of the families are content with preserving that legend and
right,
not
yeah,
having them be disturbed.
yeah,
And so, yeah. It's very sweet that they do that every year for them.
yes. Like I said, I have great respect for any place that holds that sort of respect for those who never were able to make it back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's just a beautiful ceremony,
Yeah.
I suppose you could say. And for anything, for shipwrecks, for people, for soldiers who go to war and aren't able to return,
Yeah.
anything like that.
Yeah. Good to remember you're dead.
Right. So that's all I have.
So there were no other suspects in the case, just Peel?
No. So yes, the police believe they found the guy. They never really actively looked for anyone else.
Yeah, I mean-
They just believe they had him and got away.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of friction in the investigators, where there's at least one guy who believes that it was related to drugs
Right.
in some form or fashion. And another investigator was like, that's bull honky. There's no evidence of drugs. This is, he did this for revenge, that sort of thing. But they do believe that it was Peel, so no one else was ever looked at as a suspect.
Yeah, and that happens a lot, where they think they get their guy,
Yeah.
and then they get acquitted, even if it is or isn't their guy, and then they
Right.
just drop the case. Like, it happens a lot.
Yeah.
Like, the
Yes.
West Memphis 3 is a big case, but, yeah.
Yep.
But I think if Peel did it, which I think it's a coin flip if he did or not.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no evidence either way.
Like, I could very much see him doing it, but I could also see him not doing it.
Correct.
Like, he could have been at the wrong place at the wrong time, or he could have
Yep.
been at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, he was working on a fishing boat as well at that time, so he was also in the area.
Right.
There was a lot of fishermen there.
Oh, yeah.
It wouldn't be odd for him to be there.
Yeah.
So
Right, and it was confirmed that he was there, right?
yes, he was there working on another ship.
Right, he was
which-
in Craig at the time. So
Yes.
yeah, and we knew he knew the victims, so that's and I don't think it was over drugs. I think if he
Right.
did it, which I'm not willing to lean one way or the other, but I'm more convinced that he did. I would say it would have been for revenge or for money
Yeah.
or for both.
Yeah, I could see. Yeah, I could see something where he felt like he was owed money, and
Yeah.
due to being fired and everything, like he felt like he wasn't paid his dues or whatever, and he sees that Mark is being successful, and it all comes
Right.
to a head at once, and
Yeah.
everything like that.
Yeah, a very just August heat moment of
Yeah.
just of
Of it all.
getting pushed over the edge, and maybe
Yeah.
he was under the influence, and that's what pushed him over,
Right.
which
yeah.
is very possible if
Because
he
if it-
was selling drugs.
Yeah. If it's true that he was the one that was selling drugs, then potentially, yeah.
Yes, potentially.
Because
And I'm not saying drugs is what caused it, but he could have been stewing over it. And whenever he went and talked to, what was it, Moon and the other guy, when he was selling them drugs or talking about selling
Right.
them drugs, maybe they told him, hey, we just got back from a trip where we got 90,000 pounds of fish,
yeah,
and we're going to be getting this much. And
Yeah.
maybe that pushed him close to where he's like, fuck this guy. This guy
Yeah.
screwed me over, and now he's getting paid for it. And then
Yeah.
he goes home, he's stewing on it, and he lights up something. It'd have to be something hard, but like I don't think if he smoked weed that would push him to do it. but that was the push that he needed, the last nail in the coffin for these 8 people. And it
right,
pushed him to act.
Right.
Because he wasn't thinking
Yeah.
straight. But yeah, and given that we don't know what drugs he was allegedly using or selling, it's
Right.
speculation on that end. And
right,
maybe he was just disturbed, maybe he was in a bad mental state, maybe because of drugs.
right,
And hearing that only pushed him further. It's I think there's a lot of evidence that it could be him, but it's all speculation. So,
But it is, yeah, because there's any sort of evidence was burned and then trampled over and then erased by high tide.
yeah.
So it's hard to say either way because there is that lack of evidence,
Yeah, I mean, there's no physical evidence tying him to the case, and a lot of the other evidence is mostly hearsay.
Yes.
Like, did he do drugs? Was he selling drugs to these guys? Did he know these guys? How well
Yeah.
did he know them?
Yep.
What drove him to go there that night? Did he hear about it from
Right.
the two dudes, the two crewmates? Like, there's a lot of weak threads,
Right.
But I think enough threads to investigate more if there were more evidence.
Yeah, that's the problem is that I feel like this shouldn't have gone to trial, at least at that stage.
Right.
Because when you try who is likely your best suspect, and you get that not guilty, you can never bring them to trial
It hurts
again.
your case a lot.
Yeah.
Well, you can't bring them to trial again
if they had-
without new evidence.
Right.
Or unless you can prove it was a poor trial and get a retrial, which is what they did.
Yeah.
And even that didn't go their way. But
No. I mean, yeah, with the hung jury, you pretty much have to have another trial. But if they did something like with the Golden State Killer, where they waited, they kept checking every once in a while to see, do we have something now that can verify someone?
But with Golden State,
and
they
they
also had DNA. They
did have DNA.
They
Yeah.
had a reason to wait. But with this, it's
Right.
eyewitnesses
It is
and
true.
nothing else.
Right.
And waiting
But
for
if they had
eyewitnesses
been able
is more of a
to,
hindrance.
Yeah. But you never know, if they were able to collect parts of the boat, if they had brought the skiff in for impound, stuff like that, where someone could test later. When the technology was better, that might be able to.
Yeah, I think
specifically-
the skiff was their best bet of getting something, and they didn't do it.
And they didn't do it, yeah.
Which I've heard that fingerprints and DNA last a lot longer than people think they do, so they may not have been washed away. But if it was storming bad
Yeah.
enough to where the people partying 50 feet away from them couldn't hear them getting shot, then
Well, that was. I mean, the skiff was still used several days after all that as well.
that's true.
Because they had to go to Craig for the gas and go back to the investor and then go back to Craig. So
Right.
that was after the storm had passed. That was after the fog. So
Yeah.
there was
that's,
probably fingerprints on there.
Yeah, there probably was. Yeah, they
Yeah.
should have tested the
So-
skiff.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it's like, if they had done this, if they had done that,
Right.
with hindsight, you can see where mistakes were made. In the moment, maybe not so much, but
And it's what happened to the skiff? Because it seems like it disappeared
I
after the
don't
cop
know.
left it.
yeah, that's the last time it's mentioned. I never saw any sort of mention of it afterwards. I don't know if someone else was just like, "Oh, hey, free skiff, taking that,"
Right.
or
did someone
what
take
happened.
it? Did the killer take it after he had figured out his mistake? Because
I don't know. I never saw mention anywhere what happened
Yeah,
to the skiff
'cause-
after.
if they find out it's a murder scene, they're like, "Oh, the skiff's right over there." Like they could just go get it now, but
Yeah.
it seems strange that they wouldn't
Right.
get it unless it was gone whenever they went to
Well,
find it.
Because it's one of those things that, like, the officer said allegedly at the time, he didn't think it was an important thing, and so it
Right.
was just left there. I'm sure someone else towed it off because it was at cold storage. It was probably in someone's way. So someone else probably towed it off to God knows where,
Yeah.
and then maybe it ended up in some sort of salvage yard or something, or it got auctioned off to someone else.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, do skiffs typically
I
have
could-
the name of the ship they're attached to on there?
I'm not sure.
Like, would it say investor?
Yeah, I didn't see anywhere where it mentioned that it had the investor name on it, but people said that, or apparently some people knew that it belonged to the investor.
Right. Which implies that it had its name on it.
Had something that people were familiar with and being like, oh yeah, that belongs to the investor.
Right. So it's just such a small window where the cop sees it, the skiff, to the point where they're like, oh, the skiff's important. That's like 2 days, right?
Right. Yeah.
Where they're able to confirm, like, oh, this is a murder case.
Yeah.
And, oh, the suspect was seen on this skiff. Let's go grab that.
Right,
And then it's
because
gone.
the bodies were pulled out, I believe, the first day of the fire, because they got it down
Right.
enough where they could board the ship
Yeah.
and get it. So at that point, and the police officer knew right off the bat, it's like, this is arson.
Right.
So seeing the skiff somewhere else should have been like, we're going to take that real quick, and whoever tries to get on that boat, bring them too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
none of that happened.
Like, I think the smart thing to do would have been to impound it and look for DNA, or to stake it out and watch it to see if someone comes back for it,
Yeah.
and then jump
Right.
on them when they go and get near it and question them. And if it's John
Right.
Peel, then hey,
Right. Yeah.
like, this gift's the smoking gun, and they just threw it in the trash.
Yeah. There's so much of this investigation was just
And a lot of it was
Not
done
handled well.
which is, it's sad.
Yeah.
Because,
right. It's like they had a couple competent police officers and then several not, and it was just frustrating.
it's very frustrating. Because, like,
Yeah.
what was his name? Anderson? Like, that guy seemed
Yep.
like he was on top of things, you know?
Right. But he seemed to be focused on the investor itself. He wasn't focused
Right.
on the investigation in Craig.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it seems like you have half the crime scene. like,
yeah.
it's like you don't have the other half, and that other
Right.
half is the important part. And not to
Yeah.
say that the investor isn't important, but there's no evidence there.
Right. At that point, it was destroyed in one
It was
way or
gutted.
another. Yeah. Which, again, the incompetence of just not guarding the investor when it was towed in
Yeah.
and just allowing whoever to wander on there and be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
huh, wow.
And,
And-
and would that have made a difference? Who knows?
Right. Who knows?
Maybe the fire had already destroyed any evidence.
Right.
But-
But at this point, who knows, right? Because there could have been
Right.
evidence that was stampeded over.
Yeah.
So it could have made
Yeah.
a difference. It could have not. We don't know. It's just so frustrating.
It's very
So
frustrating.
this is technically unsolved with a suspect that is the most likely, I suppose you could
Right.
say.
Well, the only suspect,
Well, the only suspect,
who's very likely.
but it's very likely it was him. I won't say it was
and
him, but
I think the only way that this could potentially get solved would be a deathbed confession. Like,
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
only thing. Like, because there's not enough to point
Mm-hmm.
the finger at him, you know.
right, yeah. Yeah. Well,
Which
there
if
wasn't
he-
enough for the trial either, but they still did that.
Yeah, I mean, if he confessed to the guys on the other boat, then hey, he could be open to the idea.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sometimes I wonder about that sort of stuff too, right? Because it's like, you wouldn't go up to someone and just joke around and be like, haha, I killed those 8 people.
Right. I know.
So if that really did happen, I'd be like, is this guy like really serious? Because I don't think people joke around about
No,
that.
they don't. They definitely don't. They don't.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
So.
And again, I'm suspect at best that actually happened. But
It actually happened,
doesn't.
yeah. It wasn't some sailors just saying things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, just hearing about it and looking for some like
Someone to get their name in the news
exactly.
or whatever. Yeah.
And also if Peel did do it, then they could potentially get some kind of reward. I don't know if there was a reward, but
I don't know either. I never saw
yeah.
mention of one.
Right. And maybe they were thinking that, and so
Maybe.
they made up a story because they're like, oh, we know that guy, so let's get some money or fame.
Yeah. Well,
So that's it.
that's
Nothing
it.
else.
That's all I got.
Yeah, we've been going for a while, so
We have. This one
yeah,
has
this one's
been a lot
long.
of speculation on our part.
Yeah, and that's the thing about unsolved cases is there's a lot to talk about with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that will wrap up Alaska, number 2. And next up is Arizona, right?
Yes, next is Arizona.
And from what you told me, that one's not exactly a short one either.
No, that guy's pretty wild.
Yeah. And this
That
Arizona,
one's another solved one.
yeah, Arizona's
Spoilers.
solved. You told me that. So,
Yes.
yeah. So, if you want to hear the story about this wild and crazy dude, I haven't heard this case. I'm excited to hear it. Tune in next week for Road Trip Criminals.
See you next week, hopefully.
Hopefully. We'll see you then.